Hello everyone. This is a quick introduction to some major topics and motifs from Volume 1 of Frankenstein. This obviously does not cover the whole novel, or should it try to. That would be a much longer piece, but I wanted to isolate some of the elements that may start developing throughout. So let's get going. Nature is probably one of the first ones. And it's in large part due to Walton. Walton's goal to go to the North Pole just invites ideas of nature. And we get the descriptions of the cold. We get the description of that beautiful sort of sunset while he's in St. Petersburg, Russia. And also connects it to conquering nature, which is this idea of glory that we'll probably start really exploring toward the end. Or middle and end of the piece. Nature does offer solitude, but in this instance, and people commenting have said, hey, it's not always great. And very true. We get some very evil forebodings as Victor, for instance, is getting home for the first time with that thunderstorm. But that idea, I shall certainly find no friend of the wide ocean, or even hear an archangel, may foreshadow his encounter with Victor. But the idea of nature and solitude are linked throughout, later on in the piece especially, while Victor is coming home when he's free of the city. He tends to find a little solace there, but again, it goes south pretty quickly. Learning and education is another one that stands out, and most people, if you're going into teaching, this may come up. The idea of that self-learning, that self-motivation, the idea of application, as he calls it, of being self-guided in learning. Goals set, but pace and methodologies left to the learner lead to some issues later on in a traditional college setting. If we're talking about that idea of self versus institution and romanticism, that learning and education becomes a very specific way in which Shelley goes after that. We see M. Waldman and M. Kremp, their attitudes being different, in regards to the time Victor had spent studying these fantastic ideas of Cornelius Agrippa and others. It was very different when, the quote is, very different when masters of grand science sought immortality and power. Such views, although feudal, were grand. Well, immortality is not what we get from Victor. We do get some power over death if he's going into these charnel houses to find body parts. The field as we know it didn't really come about in terms of chemistry before a few years before Shelley wrote. So chemistry encompassed a lot more. There wasn't a whole lot of the formulas that we understand today. There were some, but not as many. So Victor's path of study wouldn't have been as strange, perhaps. The consumption of those studies, the idea of throwing oneself into one work, he improves. He becomes almost supernatural capability later on, Waldman. But he also, and I think Shelley does this to sort of say, well, scientists wouldn't normally do this for fear of death. Shelley points out, like, no, he's superstitious. No superstition about him. This was a time in which people were altering their ideas about how to approach medicine. And the use of dead bodies in medicine is something we take for granted today. I had friends who were taking specific courses where they spent a whole semester with a cadaver that was taken care of, and that's how they learned a lot of how the body works. It's during this time where he learns the whole secret of giving life to lifeless matter. And the frame narrative is one of my favorite tricks as a writer that I've seen in text. Rather than explaining how it happened and trying to come up with this theory, Shelley just has her narrator say, yeah, I'm not telling you because that's dangerous. And, makes sense, but it also saved Shelley from having to come up with an entire way of doing that. The creation itself, and you won't find monster a lot for reasons that we'll get into a little bit later. That supernatural enthusiasm that he talked about pops up here first, although we do get to see it in that application of study. and it just gets worse and worse as he gets closer and closer to the creation of the creature. Doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, he withdraws from his family. He feels bad about not writing his family, but not bad enough to obviously sit down and do it. And as soon as he brings the creature to life, he is immediately terrified and runs away. The dreams he has in chapter 4 are important to a romantic audience because imagination is probably what we would deem subconscious today. And those dreams would have had weight for an audience. Even if not practical, it would have been very much a motif of literature at the time where whatever's happening in somebody's head carries this sort of elemental weight that it doesn't necessarily always today when you're reading. He meets Henry Clerval, one of his best friends, who's just happening by for a visit the moment after the creature wakes up. Yeah, there are some writing elements, story elements that are going to seem kind of convenient if you read this text. On that entertainment level that we talked about, you have to read it first. There are quite a few words. Not the best written novel. But there is that sense of Clerval's personality being one of the things that's able to calm Victor down. That innate sense. And again, it's from a romantic perspective. It's this, who this person is one of the reasons things are slowing down. It becomes, again, important for that reason. Marks a time when the natural passages, in this instance, the seasons. We get to see winter, fall turn into winter, and we don't have a whole lot of months until the date is set. The one element about Elizabeth's letter that comes as they're considering when to leave is, again, a very nature versus institution idea. The farmer versus the judge. Elizabeth's leaning toward the farmer and points out judges deal with the worst of humanity even if that person is innocent in that letter. The idea that even a good judge is going to be surrounded by corrupting influences. Even if they're the most fair judge, they're going to see not just innocent people, they're going to see the people that are causing the problems. As a farmer, we talked about this, the introduction of Romanticism. A farmer, his entire life is good. It's not easy, but it's good. Justine will come up later, but she's also introduced in the letter. And the mental damage that that recovery that Victor has with Clerval is not healed all the mental damage. We get an entire scene where Monsieur Kremp actually praising Victor, the person that he detested, the person he didn't like, just praising him continually, throws him into almost a fit, whereas Waldman seems to recognize that it's causing him some discomfort and backs off a little bit. The point about Clerval and that personality, the imagination, is one of the other ideas that will come up quite a bit. Too vivid for the minutiae of science. Today it's a little different. We find scientists probably that pinnacle of academic or intellectual achievement because of what they can accomplish through those studies. At the time, when Shelley was writing, in this text anyway, Victor, the scientist who literally just bestowed life on another human, finds Clerval's mind a little bit broader than his own. So we also, and then as they are leaving, they get the letter from Victor's father where William, his brother, has been killed, strangled, and they are book it home. Before he sees the creature, we talked about that storm just a little bit ago. Before he sees the creature, all of this starts pulling together. There are a lot of open threads in this story at the beginning of it, and as the volume comes to a close, we get to see them all sort of coming together. Victor's creation, he was worried there were going to be some terrible consequences to it. He doesn't necessarily put together that William's death was the creature's until those dreams start happening. And then those dreams are confirmed when he sees the creature with superhuman agility scaling a mountainside. That immediate connection is one of those things that comes up because Victor is not often wrong about things. And we get a definite sense that, anybody reading this is probably convinced that Victor is probably right when he makes that connection. It's not one of those where, oh, maybe he's wrong, maybe something else happened. Most people reading this that when I've asked them have said, yeah, no, that's yeah, no doubt. Um, and so when we get to the house and Ernest welcomes him in, we're already pretty convinced that things are not going to go well on this visit. And it just keeps getting worse as we find out Justine has been accused of the crime. Everybody is in misery for this. The family, we get empathy a whole lot from the family. There is always an emotional sort of sensation from that family from Victor's perspective. And Victor knows who did it. And again, we know he widely suspects it, but again, Shelley's not leaving a lot to chance there. The faith that they put in the judicial system is probably one of the most talked about elements today, is my guess, when people are reading this text, because Justine is as innocent as could be. Sterling reputation. Elizabeth makes an impassioned plea, and then we find out about the evidence. But again, Elizabeth is putting herself out there. And we've already seen Elizabeth praise this as sort of pristine example of humanity, and that idea of her being wrong puts not oh my gosh, Elizabeth was wrong. Except we already know Justine is innocent when this trial goes on, and then by the time the evidence, the necklace, is found on Justine, probably a pretty good idea again of what's going to happen. It's not a surprise that Justine is convicted, but there is a surprise from the judge, from the characters in the piece. Justine's confession, and I point this out just because it's another institution that gets lumped into this one. Again, I don't think it's accidental. I'm not sure. Shelley was thinking, a romantic idea, but the idea that institutions are not going to protect people from the machinations of other people is something that comes up quite a bit in this piece. And the church is not able to absolve Justine because she confesses for a crime she did not commit. And I call it a romantic element because that absolution can't come from somewhere else in this instance. And it's the responsibility of one person. And that's why I end this slideshow on that idea that Victor considers himself the true murderer. The entire first volume sets up accountability for one person. The idea that Victor created this. And it's also mostly through Victor's perspective. And that imaginative element, that focus on the self, is something that is worth considering throughout the rest of the piece as we move into volume 2 and 3. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know.